How hard is it not to scream when you get nettled twice?
Very hard, buddy.
Harrying. It's harrying. Have you heard of it, Neil?
I don't believe I have. Do you want to elaborate?
Well, there was a war between the kings, wasn't there? King Harold and William the Conqueror at the Battle of Hastings.
That's right.
In 1066, where William the Conqueror was crowned king, wasn't he?
That's right,
because he beat him. But the north of England, where we are now, rose up in rebellion against him. Well, against the Normans, really. But William responded, and he was utterly ruthless, and that became known as the harrying.
Right. And was that a war? Was it just a thing he set out?
Well, he sent his men up north, and they were burning crops, destroying villages, and, you know, killing all the bloody locals and everything.
Which was way back then.
Way back, yeah.
Wasn't it? I mean, we only have to revert back to what we were talking about, the Braveheart era.
Yeah. And the only reason I'm mentioning that is because part of that, to keep the north in check, was the reason why this was built.
Really?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So that's why we got this now. It's just an interesting fact I read up today.
But it makes sense, doesn't it? It's like once something starts sweeping across the land, and it's attacking and pillaging and raping and doing all them things they did back then you're going to put up your defences, aren't you? You're going to build a force, you're going to get your army together, you're going to line your boundaries and say, right, we're waiting for you. And just like is known in history, we've all read about this in the history books, how one county, the Lancashires, the Yorkshiremen, the Welsh, and all the wars which have took place on our soil, English soil, that's how it used to be. And it was a territorial thing. We were all Robins back then. It was our patch, and we had to look after it. Yeah.
I mean, the village of Whorlton was actually in the Domesday Book.
It is, yeah.
And it had they did put values on towns as well back in them days.
Really?
Oh yeah, I mean, back in 1066, this place was valued, the whole village, at £24.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
But after the harrying, as it was known then, it was valued then at £1.03.
Really?
Because it was mostly destroyed.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. But £24 back in the 12th
Oh, it was
century,
a lot of money.
If you could have a calculator to work out what that would be worth now, we're talking billions.
Yeah.
But,
It was a lot of money. But then this, as I say, this was built as a consequences of the harrying. And this is it was a 3-storey gatehouse, wasn't it?
Yes, it is. It's a shame we can't get in here and look at that structure I talked about, the church-like structure, which is very typical of the Nordic kind of how they built things. And remember, this is a Roman fortress, and obviously the Romans came here and set up, but I just don't know if you can see what I can see here.
Let's just see if we can get.
So if you look at up above either side of the gate, let me see if I can point. So just slightly higher as the arch begins, you've got 2 concrete pillars sticking out, and they would have carried either wood or a concrete formation right to the centre of this square, and the same on this side, which obviously we can't see anyway. And this would have been a cathedral style archway you would have either walked through or rode through, and it's still got the old cobble down on the floor. Midway up of the gate, you will actually see the square holes where wooden beams would have been, and this would have been the floor on the right hand side and the left hand side. The fireplaces we talked about on again the right hand side and the left hand side, and there would have been 2 separate rooms, one left, one right. This hallway would have been where people entered and left, and then there would have branched off into these rooms.
I've got a question for you.
Yep.
And looking at this and the way it's been built, that gate would have led straight through to this part, wouldn't it?
Yes.
As one central hall.
And if you look at how we talked about the foundations and where you can see the old history of where that part of the building met this, this area had no building on it.
No, that's right.
It's like anything entering here would have entered straight in front of us now, and there would have been that area which wouldn't have had. I'm assuming that, looking at that, there's nothing on the right of you now which shows that any building outcropped out and formed itself on this land. The only foundations which are still present now, as we talked about, we have the seal of where the roof would have met the building, and it would have been as we used.
Oh yes, you can see that, yeah.
And that came down the other side, so we know it had a pitched roof.
Yeah.
The pitched roof would have run right across over to the vaults we've talked about, the cellars, and any part of the upper floors, inner floors and lower floors are all shown here, where wooden beams would have entered the brickwork and then joist out to form the part of that section of the building. The other side of the building, if we go across there, bearing in mind the ironwork which is on the building now is only added recently to stop the wall bowing out because it is crumbling. There's no evidence whatsoever on this side of the building of any foundation of a building outcropping out into this area, and this area, I believe, could have been anything from once you entered the fortress, you were protected by the moat and bailey water surround, and this would have been a safe haven unless they had bows and arrows, which at some point they did back in the day. There's a little bit of evidence of some form of floor here, and then holes in that wall would have been where there was once a door and it's been bricked up. That would have been where something would have fitted into there.
That's bricked up recently, that.
Yeah,
It's not that long ago that
been
was.
taken from the existing foundations here. But this section of the castle is showing weakness. They put the ironwork into.
You can see cracks.
There's bars going across when you walk in the inner walls. You have to duck between them bars. And like I said, the guards room would have been here. This would have been part of the guards room here. There's a little doorway which takes you into there, and there's a window around here if you can get this. Look, yep, there's a little peephole here.
Oh yeah, I saw that as we were
So
coming in.
that's one of the guards' rooms. That would have been the peephole. On that side of the building, there's another guard's room in the inner walls, but we've showed you that on the picture. All these marks on the wall, we've questioned in the past, are these lead shot marks, or is it just decay? Is this where it was once under attack, which it was in its day, and all the lead shots or whatever they were using as a weapon, are these all the marks on the wall? Or is it just decay? 12th century we're talking about, but this is when it was built in the 12th century. You remember it ran right away into the 14th century, and it took ownership over many families which we've mentioned in the narration of this. So as it passed through the generations of the owners and the soldiers who were here, is this modern for the era, 14th century, of when it was under attack? Are these holes just part of what we see traditionally with limestone, where the decay, it starts in one point and then it pock marks out and you end up with something similar to this brick here? So this is the vaults I talk about, a place where they would have stored preservatives. Anything they would have made in the township would have been stored here, from cheeses, even to preserving the meats, the hams and pork and what the soldiers would have ate. There's 2 in total. You can't get access to them now unless you want to go through the brush, which is some steps just down there, but obviously there's them stinging nettles there. As you can see, the walls are finished, so it would have been lived in or used. It's not raw brickwork like you can see on the top there. And rumour has it, the village of Swainby over the years have actually removed stone from here to continue to build their garden walls and houses. And a lot of the properties around here will have the remains of this castle built into the brickwork of the homes and gardens and gates.
So guys, we're at Whorlton Castle. We've got Neil up on the top there. And Neil,
yeah?
Just a question, what were these then?
I'm calling them vaults. They're probably a cellar. There would have been something where food, anything grown on the land,
Right.
would have been kept. There's no evidence of any tunnels leading away from this place or anything coming.
So you're saying these would have been like cellars where they'd stored food and stuff like that?
Well, this being the back of the building,
Yeah.
and this being one of the levels within the building,
Yeah.
there's stairs at the back, and maybe this could have been even the butler's quarters. And I know that we're not talking Victorian kind of having waiters, but what's to say that the family who once lived here and the Roman soldiers or whoever lived here were protected by didn't have someone who fed them daily, like
Right.
a chef, and they would have came to this area, bearing in mind these are underground,
Yeah.
and you wouldn't see them as you see them now because of exposure. They would have went down these steps into the basement or the vault or the cellar, whatever we want to call it, retrieved something like the homemade jam, the bread, anything which was preserved, the meats in salt, and then brought them back up either through them stairs there into the lower part of the building or up them stairs there. And then if there was servants, they would have served the masters, they would have put the food on the table.
Right.
Are we in a kitchen area? I honestly don't know.
But what you're standing on, you're saying, is the floor.
This would have been the floor, and obviously this is underneath the foundation of that floor. We have a channel here which runs away from the building. Now there's these up on top of the roof. Now they collected rainwater because that's how it worked back in the day. Is there something where waste was poured in?
Well, you don't know,
and
do
it
you?
ran away from the building? Or was there some kind of setup here where, because it's like right in this room area, there's a very smooth surface with a drainage area running away.
Yeah.
But because of so much of the building's missing, based on that being their back wall, where did that run to?
Whorlton Castle is a ruined 14th century tower house on the site of a Norman motte and bailey fortification. In 1066, William the Conqueror defeated King Harold at the Battle of Hastings and was crowned the King of England. But just because he wore the crown, it didn't mean he controlled his newly won kingdom. The north of England rose in rebellion against the Normans, and William responded with utter ruthlessness. It's what became known as harrying of the north. He cut a swathe of destruction across the north, burning crops and destroying villages, leaving its inhabitants temporarily cowed. But William wanted more than a temporary peace, he wanted control. And to ensure that he kept the inhabitants under his thumb, William built and encouraged his barons to build a series of castles across Yorkshire and the north, and one of these castles was Whorlton Castle.
This obviously would have been the floor. And if you look at where the 3/4 of the way up on the door, you can actually see the floor level where the wooden struts would have run into the wall. So if you put a laser line on here now and pointed it at that wall, it'd meet all them lines.
Probably under you would probably be where they kept the
Well, it'd be cheeses and dairy and the
meats and that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
covered in salts in some. It could have been at some point a cellar as well for the soldiers, because you have to remember the soldiers were based here for a long time, the Roman soldiers, and what you can't see on the footage where you're looking at, Paul will bring up a photo now, and it'll show you where the guards' rooms were. So before you see this photo, in each corner of the building, excluding the staircase there was a little compartment where the guards slept. So we'll cut to that picture now. And these guards would have spent the shifts monitoring the outside through the little windows in case of an attack. Now, if you pan round and look all the way around at the view, this is probably one of the highest points when this, back in the 12th century, would have been a lookout point. Obviously, the Romans built fortresses on top of hills, so one, it would prevent the attackers having the energy when attacking, plus it was also a lookout point. This building as well, this castle, was built on a crossroads, and well, actually it was a freeway road. One road led off to York, the other one led up to Northumberland towards the Newcastle way, what we know now, and the other one went South Lakes right across the country into the Cumbria territory. Back in the day when we talk about William Wallace and that era, soldiers used to run from one township to another to pass the news to the next fortress, and then this news they would send a runner from here along these Roman roads to the next fortress and then pass that information on, because as you know, telephone, wireless and radio weren't a thing of them in the 12th century. So these roads were a direct link, one straight line to the next town, city or village where they would pass that news on.
Am I right in saying that that part of the building wasn't built until the 14th century?
So the initial grounds was a wooden fortress. I dare say through decay, battle and everything else, they then rebuilt it in the 12th century, which is the limestone you see now, and then there would have been add-ons on. It consisted of 3 levels. There was the only way I can describe it is where a horse and cart or soldiers would go through that gate and into the next gate and out the other side. But either side of that were rooms with fireplaces where people would have been, whether they were based there, they lived there, and then through them stairs, which are hidden by that arched wooden door there, it would take you to the next level. It's a dual skin castle, so there's an inner corridor within the walls of this building, where once you get inside, which you used to many years ago, you could walk around the perimeter, the internal perimeter of the walls, and then come back to the staircase before you walked up to the next staircase, and that would take you right to the top. And if you could still get inside there now, when we might be able to get it on camera, you can actually see where the arch, just like a church, a 12th century churches, you can see the stonework of an arch where as you walk through that gate towards the next one, it would have had an arched ceiling in it, whether it was made of wood.
Is there also a fireplace in there?
There's a firestone on every level on each side of the wall. So on the far side over there, there's 2 fireplaces, the upper level and the lower level, and the same on this side. Right at the top there, you could once walk across, but it's too dangerous to do so. There's a rain gully running right across, just like the modern plastic rain drainaways we have today on our houses. There's this stone. We have some video footage of that, which we might be able to put into this right now.
So, would you say that this building came from the gatehouse all the way back to where we stood now?
Yeah, you can see the pitch of the roof as it comes away from that location. We are up a height as well, so we're not on ground level, nor are we actually on the actual first floor. But you're actually stood on the floor, which would have ran perpendicular with this building. I'm assuming that this building would have run right up to there, or ran from there all the way back here, and this would have been what I call an outcrop of the left hand side of the gate. And all that side we can see over that side, which is overgrown, and it's only overgrown because of the time. there's no evidence whatsoever of anything being built there. Earlier on in the year, if you'd have came here when the grass was very low, you could see people had done metal detecting down there. So all of that area had been dug up, looking for anything which would have been lost in the soil. It could have been part of the gardens where they would have grew their own crops, from carrots to turnips or cabbages, whatever were around back in the 12th century. And then obviously could have been harvested and brought into this area and kept in these vaults. I keep referring them to vaults, cellars, whatever they were. Did they actually hold prisoners here? I don't know. There's no evidence in history of what this part of the building was, and there's very little evidence of this building altogether. But we've got the plans which we've shown you in the footage of the layout of the building, and it's been stood like this for many years now with no roof on whatsoever. So what's remaining now is very little of the remains of the building, the footprint of the building. As you can see, we're right at the back of the building now, which is the furthest point from the actual fortress, and this is like an outcrop of the remaining of the building. Underneath us, well, you could call them vaults, you could call them tombs, you could call them dungeons, but they would have stored preservatives in there. These preservatives would have been what was made on the land from jams. The meats would have been stored in there for the eating. Remember, we had soldiers here, and we actually have what looks to be a bath here. More than likely it's a trough. It would have been a source of water in there, fresh water. And just behind where I'm stood now, you'll actually see the bailey which runs right away around there. This place had a moat all the way around the fortress, and I keep calling it a fortress, a Roman. It's known as Whorlton Castle, but it was mainly a fortress to protect this area, Whorlton, which was the village at its time. And that moat would have ran the full perimeter of this location all the way around, and at some point when the farmers took ownership of the land later on in the centuries, some of it would have been filled in. It's not known to have a drawbridge, and there's nothing in history which mentions a drawbridge, which is kind of unusual, because to have a fortress which is accessible on land doesn't make sense. But there's no history of this fortress, this drawbridge ever been here.
The first castle was a rudimentary motte and bailey earthwork, topped by a timber palisade. It occupied Castle Bank, which was a spur of the Cleveland Hills. One very unusual feature is that the motte was square rather than the more typical oval shape, and the bailey was rectangular. The 11th century castle was passed down to Lord Darcy of Nath in 1343, and Darcy pulled down the earlier castle and levelled the motte. In its place he built a fortified tower house of stone. The house was defended by a curtain wall, with an inner ward which reached through to an impressive stone gatehouse. This 14th century gatehouse is all that remains of Whorlton Castle today. The medieval old church of the Holy Cross was known in the pre-Reformation era as the Church of the Holy Rood. The old church itself now mainly stands in ruins, although the 14th century tower on the side of the nave and the chancel still survive. It was constructed in the 12th century, and most of the arches that you see today are of Norman style. The effigy which is inside represents a second Lord Nicholas de Maynell of Whorlton Castle, a descendant of Robert de Maynell who died in 1322. It is made of bog oak, is hollow and was originally packed with charcoal to preserve it. It is thought to be the only wooden London-made military effigy in Yorkshire. The old parish church was used for the last time on the 7th of March 1875, and the new church in Swainby, also called the Church of the Holy Cross, became the church for the parish in 1877.
I guess there's two churches, like one
Oh.
built on top of the other.
This I'm filming now is the oldest part of it, going back to Anglo-Saxon, and what the bit Paul's videoing now is the late 19th century. So this would have been destroyed in what Paul spoke about. To that fortress is buried in it. I'm sure I read.
Well, it would have been a fancy grave then, wouldn't it?
No, I'm wrong. I'm on about. It's Kirkleatham. The last
Right.
to the manor house is buried in Kirkleatham.
Either that's quite an old one, isn't it?
Well, I dare say that side would have been the oldest and they worked this way.
Yeah.
But that could be just down to how much money they had to pay for it. Because what you don't see in here is the big pots, do you?
I mean, there's a squirrel over there, but there's a fancy one there.
No, this one in the picture is just like that. So this is very little what's left of, I don't know if... So as we talked about the pitch of the roof, I know we've covered this many times, but I don't even know what the question was. What did you ask me?
I'll have to watch it back. So, Mr. Neil. Have you heard of the
I need to take out here.
harrying? It's harrying.